Welcome to the Dental Breakdown Show. This show is where we break down issues in the dental marketplace. My name is Christian White, CEO of White & Associates Practice Consulting, Better Business, Better Dentistry. We welcome Lisa Netzer and Joe Fricton to the show. Welcome, guys.
Thanks, Christian.
Hello, Christian.
Lisa, why don't we start out with having you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Hi, Christian. I am an attorney in Minnesota, and I work at Minnesota Transitions with Joe Fricton. We're a law firm that specializes in working with dentists. I particularly specialize in employment law, working with dentists on employment decisions and guiding them through the legal requirements. I also help draft employment handbooks for them, and with a special eye towards specifically small employers with usually around 10 employees, because there are a lot of exceptions to legal rules when you get to an employer that is that small. In addition to employment law, I represent dentists who are being investigated by the Minnesota Board of Dentistry, and I work with them on writing response letters, drafting formal responses, and will appear with them before the board if required. That's the type of law I do.
Wonderful. That was awesome, Lisa. I think that was one of the best introduction we've had on the show so far. That was great.
I'm summarizing
Joe, why don't we move over to you, please?
Sure. My name is Joe Fricton. I started Minnesota Transitions with Dr. Dave Lindy, and we help dentists through all stages of the practice transitions, from practice acquisitions, practice sales, valuations, associates, partnerships, and real estate, and then all the legal issues that surround those practice transitions.
Great. All right. Thank you very much, Joe. So, Joe, I'm going to stay with you just to kind of start things off. May 11th was this Monday. Executive Order 2051 was, passed by our governor. And dentistry, dentists can now do elective procedures, but most of the dentists don't know all the statutes behind that. And I think that'd be some really good information to share with them. So why don't we start there? We'll start right there with you.
Sure. Thanks, Christian. Yeah, we're very excited that the governor has allowed dental offices to open up again. I think it's great for the population of Minnesota, as well as the dental practices trying to get back to work, get their staff members back to work, and continue treating their patients. So, Christian, you're right that the governor issued their order 2051 to reopen dental offices. And my advice for dentists who, as they open up, is first advice is to read the actual order itself, and look at all the laws and resources that are out there and try to digest them for yourself. So the places that you should go kind of start with is the Minnesota Board of Dentistry website. They have a great COVID-19 page that has a long list of postings on the different executive orders and other resources. The Board of Dentistry website has a link to CDC guidelines on dental settings, the CDC guidelines on infection control, and has a link to actual governor's order. And I recommend and encourage dentists who are reopening their practices to actually go through and read through everything and digest it. You're going to have questions that come up, and we certainly can help answer those questions as it applies for a particular practice, but going through the actual orders itself, the CDC guidelines and the Board of Dentistry website is good. The last piece of information that I think is really helpful for dentists is going through, and this is on the Board of Dentistry website, but going through both the Minnesota Dental Association and the ADA resources. The ADA has a PDF that's on their website for guidance on returning to work, which is very good. It's some great information on what to consider for your individual practice as you reopen. So, but getting into a little bit of the nitty gritty, what the governor has put forth is what they're requiring doctors to do is to put together a facility plan. And the governor has has a number of criteria in the facility plan that needs to be in that plan. And what I really like, we'll get into the plan in a little bit, but what I really like about this is that you have to, the only thing you're required to do is to prepare the plan, think through your office, and put that plan together, but you're not required to file that plan with the Board of Dentistry or the state of Minnesota. You just need to have it on file, and it needs to be available if someone requests it. So so that's kind of one of the main takeaways, is that you don't need to do anything to file it. But number two that I like is that it is fully customizable to your individual practice. The Board of Dentistry has a form, kind of a sample template facility plan on their website, and they have it in Word format that you can go through and customize it to fit what is what's particular about your dental practice. We go to dental offices all across the state, and each of them are different in one way or another. They have different facilities, different staff, different procedures, and each of them are probably going to have different things in their facility plan to cover all the guidelines that the state and the governor's requiring. So I take this as an opportunity to really think about your office and what the board and the governors are encouraging you to do is to look at your office and to customize how are you going to keep your staff safe and your patients safe and yourself safe throughout your reopening. So I would say that there are, in this facility plan, there are about 3 major areas that the board is looking for detail on. One is on screening patients, screening staff. The second is on prioritizing procedures, thinking about what procedures are appropriate for your facility and your facility plan to keeping everyone safe. Number 3 is looking at your PPE, your personal protective equipment. And the 4th piece is on social distancing and how are you going to keep the staff safe and the patients safe and yourself safe as you go through, as people are going through your facility. So getting into a little bit of detail on that, the screening for staff and patients, and the board is recommending that, and from the CDC guidelines is to take patients' temperatures and staff temperatures and to screen them to see if they have potential COVID-19 symptoms. And it's what I would recommend as you're going through that is to document the screening as inpatient records. There's actually the Board of Dentistry has forms on their website for documenting that. And then they also have a risk form that the patients can sign that, it's almost like a form where they're acknowledging the risk that as they come into the dental office. And so you can find that on the Board of Dentistry's website. On the procedures in place, the board prioritization of procedures, the Board of Dentistry has a great paragraph in their plan that talks about language that you can use as you're opening up hygiene and continuing with other crown and bridge and other services that you're going to be providing and dental care that you're going to be providing in your office. And so you can read through that they have that on the template form and customize that as you see fit to kind of to what you're going to be doing. On the social distancing, what the board and the CDC and the ADA are talking about in general are to limit the number of people in offices, and this is pretty self-explanatory. And a lot of this is already outlined in the actual template that the Board of Dentistry has provided. But limiting people in the waiting room, keeping people in their cars before they come into the office, staggering appointments, creating barriers, and in between in the front office, in the front desk area, as well as in the treatment rooms as needed. That I'd say that that's a piece that is going to be a little bit. It's going to be very individual for each office, and that's why it's really good to that the board didn't mandate anything that's required to be done for that, but you're allowed the discretion to do what you see as fit, what's right for you in your office, which I think is definitely a good way to go.
It is.
On the one of the things I think is going to be kind of difficult is ramping up the infection control in the actual treatment rooms, and throughout the whole space. The ADA and the board is giving guidance on allowing time for aerosols to settle in the room before you disinfect everything. We don't know how long that is, but as long as you do something that's reasonable, you're going to be fine. The key is to be making an effort, documenting that effort, putting that in your facility plan, and kind of following through with that. Consider what's in the treatment room itself. Everything needs to be able to be disinfected if it's going to be in the room in the op. So for example, like a paper patient chart, that might not be able to be disinfected and it can't be thrown away. So,
True.
The idea of decluttering your ops and your overall office is going to be, I think it's really a good step for, keeping things out of the office, out of the ops that can't be disinfected, and, making sure that the whole treatment room is disinfected. And there's a guidance by the CDC of how to do that, how to actually disinfect the treatment rooms. Is going to be really important. And then on the last piece on the facility plans itself is PPE, which is I think it's going to be also a wide, not very wide, I guess, maybe narrow difference of opinions of what people are going to do. But the general guidance is that N95s are encouraged for any procedure that are going to have aerosols, and potentially, if you don't have as many N95s, because they're a little in short supply, is to adding a surgical mask over the N95 so that N95 can be reused. They're recommending face shields as well as gowns for as you're treating patients. Disposable gowns need to be thrown away in between each patient, and reusable gowns need to be laundered in between each patient. So that's going to create a little bit of a difficulty in terms of a cost standpoint about investment in that, and you're going to have to make a decision about what's the most important thing and way to handle it for your own office from a cost standpoint. As far as the PPE and your staff, what we recommend is documenting and training your staff on how to use the PPE and what the procedures are going to be for the entire office. And as you go through that training with your staff, it is important that's all documented. So if issues do come up down the road, you can show the state that you're making a good faith effort to keep the staff safe, keep yourself safe, and the patients safe as you go through that. There's some suggestions on air filters that a dentist could use. That can get really expensive, and it's not a requirement, but they're suggesting that if you have access to that, you can do that if you want. But as far as that facility plan, I recommend reading through that entire plan that the board has, that template, and then customizing that again for yourself. A couple other suggestions that I think that's going to be really important as you open up to be successful is to over communicate with your staff and with their patients, letting them know what your procedures are, so everyone understands what's going to be happening, and no one's going to be surprised if the staff or doctor show up in the waiting room to take a patient to a treatment room, and they're covered in a face shield and a mask and a gown and gloves. A lot of times patients and doctors, they need that physical, that face-to-face contact to develop a rapport. And it's going to be hard to have that with these, the PPE requirements. So, communication, I think, is going to be key. The other piece is considering kind of a phased opening that we're seeing. And one way is to basically start slowly in order to get your procedures down and your processes in place. I had a client I was talking to yesterday decide that she's going to just start with non-aerosol procedures, hand scaling, and then get into more of the aerosol producing procedures down the road as she and the team figure out how they're going to be how they're going to be running the office and complying with their facility plan that they put into place. The other big piece is to prepare for an infection of a team member or yourself, and how is that going to impact the office? And it's going to happen, or it's likely to happen. And so thinking through what you're going to do to preserve the office, continue treating patients or dealing with patients, I think is going to be is something that's really helpful to do going into reopening. At least, now that's not necessarily a requirement of the facility plan, but it could be part of it. You could customize it to think about how you're going to deal with that. And that way you're thinking about it with a clear mind as opposed to kind of reacting to an emergency.
Nice.
So those are the general guidelines. And I just want to reiterate that I think training your staff is going to be crucial, as well as documenting what you're doing, the training you're doing, and the screening you're doing is going to be good or is definitely a best practices as you open up.
Joe,
And Christian, if I can jump in
go
there,
ahead. I'm sorry.
I just want to reemphasize too that noticing an acknowledgement of risk form, it's a warning for people that just being in the dental office increases their risk of COVID-19. And usually the last thing you want to do is warn someone from coming to your office. I get that. But this is important. And I would think of this as an extension of the informed consent process. When you get consent for treatment, you have to let them know the risks. And this is just a continuation of that process, and that signed piece of information should be in the patient's file.
Does that risk form, Lisa, I know I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself here, but does that protect the office from a lawsuit from a patient, or I think there's got to be some questions about that, so I just want to ask.
It shows that you inform the patient of the risks, and that is going to be your best protection from a lawsuit down the road. We can never say something's going to guarantee that you're not going to get sued.
Okay.
There is no magic wand like that, but at the same time, it is a best practice that is being recommended by the board, and I suggest you go with it.
Okay. So now, an overall kind of question that I've been asked already is this piece. What are the chances that the state of Minnesota is going to actually go out and audit a dental practice that they have this facility plan, or they have something on a piece of paper written down where they can show them, here's how we're doing A, B, C, D, and E. And I've already been asked that a couple of times. I've already said, look, be safe, don't be sorry. And so I just wanted to get your guys' thoughts on that.
It's probably going to come up. It's most likely to come up after there's a complaint. If a patient complains, or a staff member, more likely would complain, that's where you're going to have a high chance of an audit. It still can happen if nothing has gone wrong, but if the board finds that a lot of offices are not complying, then they might do a broader audit process. But you can't control someone complaining to the board. And so that means that you need to be prepared for it.
Yeah. And I would add that the Minnesota board enforces the standard regulations that dentists have to act in their patients' best interests. Dentists are required to not put public health at risk, and they are supposed to do nothing that brings discredit to the profession. Those are the standards written out in statute and regulations already. So that is the board's job. So if you're doing something like running an office without a facility plan, you probably are violating one of those standards.
Sure.
And that's what makes you subject to the Minnesota board's review. And they have the power to do an investigation. Minnesota OSHA also has the power to investigate workplaces. And so that's another area of enforcement that we could see down the road.
I see that. Okay. Lisa, Joe, and just another quick thought for you guys. Have you heard back from clients who have opened this week about how things are going? I know, Joe, you gave one example. I've been getting feedback from clients that, they've got the N95 mask, they have a level 3 mask, and they have a face shield. And, after about a couple hours of doing dentistry, they're ready to pass out just from dehydration. And so I'm like, oh, how do you figure that out? Well, they're trying to figure that out. And how do you get water in? And then you have to, take all the PPE off. You got to put it all back on. So I'm just wondering if you guys have any stories or any thoughts on that.
So, Christian, I have a sister who's a labor and delivery nurse, and she's been working through the whole pandemic, and she does 12-hour shifts because that's how the hospital organizes those nurses.
Wow.
She's given one surgical mask for a 12-hour shift.
Oof.
And so other health professionals have been dealing with this for weeks.
Got it.
So my best suggestion is to tap into those other resources in your local area. If you know of doctors or nurses who've been working through this, ask them what was the best way for them to deal with those problems. For my sister, she actually found that the mask was like literally doing damage to her ears.
Right.
And they came up with a piece of plastic that could be printed on a 3D printer that can actually hold things back a little further underneath your ponytail. So it made it more comfortable for the nurses on her floor. She literally had her teenager print out a bunch of those, and she gave them out to all the nurses. She's a charge nurse, so she gave them out to all of her nurses that she could. There are creative solutions. I'm not saying it's going to be better, because I'll tell you, I had to wear an N95 mask a few weeks ago for a few hours, and it was hell. And I had more sympathy for my sister than I've ever had before in my life. I love her, but she complains a lot. So it is one of those things where this is not going to be comfortable, and it's going to be different. And this is going to be the normal for a little while. For a while, and then maybe come back into fashion again. We'll see.
So you're saying that you can do a really good a rendition of Darth Vader then?
Yeah,
right, Lisa?
pretty much. I've heard other solutions, like if your glasses fog up, if you're wearing loops,
right? Yes.
you can put Dawn soap on them. Don't rinse it off. Just do a thin layer, and it helps it not to fog up. So
Yes.
There are things out there that other health professionals have discovered that are really practical. So I would tap into those resources.
The Dental Breakdown Show, sponsored by White & Associates Practice Consulting. Better business, better dentistry. They are a practice management consulting firm for dentists and other healthcare-related businesses. Their sole purpose is to implement proven strategies through online and in-practice visits and result in the personal and professional success of the dentist and his or her team. Lisa, you are our employment law expert. And I know you've been dealing with all the employee pieces that are kind of behind the scenes a little bit with the offices reopening. I know you've got a lot to share on that, so I think I'm just going to kind of turn the floor over to you.
Okay, there are two general areas I want to talk about. One is about what laws currently apply to small employers as they are reopening and employees are starting to come back. And the second thing is what to do when employees don't want to come back. So first I want to talk about what are the regulations that apply to small dental offices. And it's important because dentists generally are exempt or can qualify for an exemption from a lot of employment statutes. So anything dealing with the Family Medical Leave Act, the extension of the Family Medical Leave Act, the Federal Families First Coronavirus Response Act, and also the Americans with Disabilities provisions, Generally, our dentists we work with are small enough that they don't deal with that. And I've talked about how to qualify for exemptions on other podcasts, Christian, that you've put out. So I don't want to repeat myself there.
Okay.
Or if this is new news to you, give us a call. We'd be happy to talk you through those bigger pieces of federal legislation.
Mm-hmm.
But there are 3 statutes or laws that you need to know about.
Okay.
And they affect dental offices. Number 1, the Minnesota Human Rights Act applies to every employer in the state of Minnesota. And it says you cannot discriminate against an employee because they've filed unemployment benefits, they've filed a complaint with Minnesota OSHA about how you're running your business, or who have had to request a change at work because of social distancing. Maybe they're caring for a child who's sick or things like that. You want to be careful not to run afoul of the Minnesota Human Rights Act. The other thing to remember is that the act covers age discrimination. So if you're worried about older workers who might face, a more severe case of COVID-19, don't assume that you should bring back younger workers first and leave older workers out or things like that. That's age discrimination. And that might apply or it might not. You need to talk with people individually to find out what's really going on with them. So in general, you need to be aware of that, the provisions of the Minnesota Human Rights Act. More specifically, and more important probably in this case now, is Minnesota OSHA regulations. They protect workers who refuse to return to work, who in good faith reasonably believe a work condition presents an imminent danger of harm. Now that's a mouthful.
That is.
So I think the best way to think about it is that if you've got someone working for you who believes things are unsafe or unhealthy because of an infectious agent, which the coronavirus is an infectious agent, they can object to returning to work. What's important here is really about specific things that are specific and things that are general. It doesn't mean that an employee can say, I'm worried about getting COVID-19 in general, and therefore I won't return to work. That is a generalized anxiety that we're all facing as a society.
True.
And Minnesota OSHA regulations don't protect against kind of generalized worries. But they do require that if it's something specific, that you do something to address it. So I would say, for as long as it's reasonable, right? We've got all those qualifiers in that big sentence I said earlier. But let's say that you're requiring a hygienist to come into work and work with a tool that causes aerosol spray without an N95 mask. That, and the hygienist objects and says, that places me in harm. That hygienist has some reason for saying that. It's probably reasonable. And you need to look at and find information about reducing aerosol risks, which you can find on the board's website. I would emphasize that if people have specific things to think creatively, read about infection control and what's important. It should be based on science. You should listen to what makes your employees comfortable when they come to work, and being patient with people instead of just saying, I don't need to do that, that's not in the regulation. Listen, if you can do something simple to get someone back through the door and get them producing again, that's important.
Right.
So we want people to think creatively about what you can do to make people feel safe. So if you talk to someone who says, I don't want to come back to work, find out if they have something specific they're worried about, or do they have something just generalized or something bigger that is keeping them from coming back into work. Additionally, last night on May 13th, Governor Walz in his statement said he was looking for ways to increase investigations into workplace complaints. I have no idea what that's going to look like. I don't know if he's going to change regulations. I don't know if he's going to increase the staff of Minnesota OSHA, maybe have Deed take over some investigations. I have no idea. We're going to have to wait and see. I don't anticipate that will be specifically aimed at dentists, but it might be aimed at Minnesota employers in general, and we'll have to wait and see what that might be. So stay tuned. There's more coming.
Oh boy.
I feel like I've been saying that for the last 6 weeks.
Yeah, but you're so good at it.
I agree with that.
Employed. So
I'm sorry.
The third law that's important to keep in mind is actually a law I wasn't very familiar with until now, which is under Minnesota law, if there is a pandemic or the Minnesota Department of Health issues orders to quarantine or self-isolate, your employees are entitled up to 21 days of unpaid leave. I
Wow.
want to emphasize this. This is unpaid leave. And that's only if they are ordered to quarantine. So how's this going to come up? Well, looks like next week people are going to start being in groups of 10 or more.
Correct.
So let's say you take your child to a birthday party and then you find out later that child whose party you were at was contagious, or is now tested positive for COVID-19.
Okay.
You are going to get an order from Minnesota Department of Health if they are doing adequate tracing to say you need now to stay home for 14 days and self-isolate. So when your employees do get those orders to self-isolate, because let's face it, they're projecting more deaths, they're projecting more cases, there is more testing yet to come. This is going to happen.
Yes.
And it might not be from the office, it might be from outside the office. It doesn't matter what the exposure is from. What matters is if you're ordered to self-quarantine, you've got to give your employees unpaid leave to go and do that. So how are you going to cover those absences of employees if they have to self-quarantine? Hopefully it isn't an exposure in the office where everyone gets hit. Hopefully it is something that's more isolated, but people need to think through how they're going to do that. But it is a specific law with the Minnesota Department of Health that allows for that, unpaid leave. I want to emphasize that. But you should know your own employee handbook, and I've said this before, but you need to understand your own rules for sick leave, vacation, and extending unpaid leave. Read it, know it, and use it when these situations come up with your staff. And if you think you need to make some adjustments, you can do that anytime. Just know that changing the rules in the middle of a pandemic might not be the best time to do that. But if you realize that you are doing things that aren't going to work for you, talk to us. Let us help you through that, because it is important to understand what your leave requires. Maybe you have to pay for 1 day of that leave. Maybe you need to pay for 2 days. You need to know what you're facing with that. So those are 3 laws: Minnesota Discrimination Act, Minnesota Human Rights Act, Minnesota OSHA regulations, and also the pandemic law that says employers must give up to 21 days of unpaid leave. Those are all 3 things you got to know about. So those are the statutory things that are going to apply to everybody.
My name is Joe Fricton. I am the founder and principal of Minnesota Transitions. We are a law firm supporting dentists through all stages of the transition process and through all stages of their careers. We have become a trusted transition firm because we listen to our clients and we work tirelessly to make sure each of them reach their transition goals.
The most common question we get, which are people calling us and saying, my employee is making more money by staying at home than they are coming back to work, and they do not want to come back to work their normal hours. It's happening all over the place. It's not unique to dentistry.
No, it's not.
So we just talked about 3 laws that apply to the situation. So if an employee is refusing to return to work, make sure you understand why. Is it just money? Is it just unemployment benefits? Is it a specific reason they don't feel comfortable returning to the office? You need to talk to them and get to the bottom of the issue and understand and listen to them, because you can't just assume it's about the money. If you're just assuming it's about the money, you're probably making a mistake.
True.
So please talk with your employees, find out what's really going on. Now, the truth is that if anyone wants to continue collecting unemployment and they're refusing to come back to a job that's available to them, they generally are no longer eligible for unemployment benefits. I say likely because this is a decision by the Minnesota Unemployment Office. They make the final call on who qualifies and who doesn't qualify for unemployment. But if you report that you had hours for an employee to work and they did not come to the office, that has traditionally meant that they are not entitled to unemployment benefits.
Can you say that again?
If you report because employers have to verify that someone who's on temporary layoff was still out of the office. If you report that they were eligible to come back to that office and that you're open, that has traditionally meant that that employee is no longer entitled to unemployment benefits. That includes the $600 from the feds. You either qualify for unemployment or you don't.
Okay.
Now you do have that in between spot where maybe you're someone who used to work 2 days a week is coming back just 1 day a week right now because you don't have a full schedule. That person is still entitled to apply for benefits for that reduced hours. That's fine. But we're talking about people who just don't even want to come in the door, right? You've got their old schedule ready for them, and they don't want to show up. That's the situation we're talking about.
Okay.
So I want to emphasize again, this is not normal times. And finding new employees is going to be like finding hen's teeth right now. And we thought the employment market for dental assistants, hygienists, and others was tight before. It's still tight. There are very few people who can really work those positions or have great experience in those positions. So I would encourage everyone to think about creative solutions for your employees. For instance, are they suddenly dealing with a childcare issue that they didn't have it before because their childcare is not available? Well, is there a shift in hours that would work better for them? If you are, is there a way for them to get other coverage from, maybe they're working with a spouse who works a different shift, maybe just shifting around hours would work. Maybe you are super busy. I've actually talked with one dentist who's like double booked all day and then had an evening appointment. Some places are really hopping right now. Can you give a hygienist an opportunity to work more than their normal hours so that they're getting a bigger paycheck from working more than staying home? What can you do to help work with them? If you have other people and you have an open front desk position, could you have one of the hygienists cover the front desk position right now? Because they know how your office works. What kind of creative solutions can you come up with? I want to encourage people to be flexible because this is a marathon and not a sprint. And opening your office might feel like a sprint. I totally get that. But we're facing increased cases and deaths over the next 2 months. That's what the models are saying. And a probable second wave in the future. And how you treat your employees now will mark whether you are someone people want to come work for or you're someone people want to avoid. And so if you can become one of those employers that people want to work for, that's going to help you in the future. And that's an investment in your business.
That is. If you're not any fun to be around, trust me, the word gets out real quick.
Exactly.
Just ask me. Well, no, don't ask me. So Lisa, here's what I get asked a lot. Okay, it's here where we're sitting here on Thursday, and I've been getting asked this since Monday. I've been waiting till now. Okay, and you kind of have answered it already, but the dentists want to know. Okay, at what point, if I open my office, Lisa, and if I'm ready to go and I have hours set for an employee, whether it's an assistant or whether it's a hygienist, and they refuse to come to work, okay, now they're not giving a specific reason, okay, this is the important part. At what point can I let them go, or when does that come into the picture? That's kind of where I'm getting a lot of confusion for people, and I wanted to make sure I asked you that.
Sure. So that is a pretty typical question. And I would emphasize that if you have an employee handbook that says if you don't show up for your scheduled shifts, it's considered a voluntary resignation, it makes things pretty easy. Because that information says, listen, you didn't show up, you were scheduled, I'm going to accept your voluntary resignation. Some places don't have a handbook, so in which case you would probably want to, number one, tell the employee, I expect you to be here during these hours next week. If you don't come, and you've already spent time on the phone with them, you've already tried to problem solve, you've already tried all those other things, you need to put them on notice that if they don't come in, their employment will be terminated. And then you would report that to the Minnesota Unemployment Office that the position is considered no longer held by that person, and it's no longer being held open for them.
Okay, so now, Lisa, if the employee is not coming to work, but they have a specific reason because,
Mhm.
there's a safety problem, or in their eyes, there's something, if they've got a specific reason, then that's something where, we need to kind of make an effort to take care of the problem or figure out what's going on or come up with a solution before we say, okay, you're done. Now, am I
Right.
right in that?
Absolutely. Yep. If
Okay.
there's something specific, like they're saying, well, listen, you're not screening patients coming in with a thermometer, and maybe there's no thermometers available to you. There are things that maybe you can come up with, which says we require all patients to take a temperature before they come to the appointment, or
Okay.
try to come up with ways to make things happen as you need to, and listen to your employees. They might have a really good point.
Hmm.
Or if you think it's just a bunch of gobbledygook that they got off the internet somewhere, talk with them about the science. Talk with them about infection control. Talk with them about what you're doing to disinfect, and see if you can work it out. And I'm not saying you always will be. There are plenty of people who base decisions not on great information, and let's face it, it says it in the acknowledgement form where you have patients sign, you are at an increased risk of having COVID-19 if you're in a dental office. It's just the nature of a dental office. But we've also been told it's safe enough to reopen.
True.
And so it is finding the balance between those two points.
Okay. That's going to be a key issue. And I know you guys are dealing with that this week, and we're going to continue to
Mhm.
deal with that as we kind of move forward. It's just because it's going to pop up.
Yeah.
It already is.
It's popped up. It's popped up a lot, but I would say in general, from people I've heard from, the idea that they can be flexible or they can talk through things a little bit more sometimes surprises them. They think there's just one black or white answer. There isn't. There never really is an employment law. There's lots of in-between steps you can take that might eventually lead to termination, but maybe there are some baby steps to help avoid that if possible.
So then here's where, Joe, if you had a facility plan that was documented and you have, we're doing this point one, point 2, 3, 4, 5 to make sure everybody's safe. And if you were to communicate that with your team and go through it with them, I think that would take care of a large percentage of what we're talking about.
Yeah, I agree. Well, in addition, what it does is that it prevents the staff from potentially coming up with an issue,
Right.
because you can show them that their general concern about something might be, they might have that concern, but it's not a legitimate concern because you're dealing with it by following the CDC guidelines, following what the Board of Dentistry is recommending, and that justifies, kind of buttresses your ability to show them that they need to come to work, and that their particularized concern is not valid.
So
But I agree with what Lisa said. Talking to them and talking around the issue is going to be the best solution.
Mhm.
So here's something that came up yesterday, and I wanted to just ask you guys about this. So a dental office, they applied for their PPP loan, and they submitted, this is our team, this is who's working for us, this is the hours everybody's working, all the information you need to submit, and then they got their money into their account, and then all of a sudden you have an employee who decides to no longer want to work there and quit. Now, does that affect that at all, or is that after the fact, and that's something that's out of the business owner's control?
So under the PPP guidelines, you need to maintain the same head count that you had prior to late March, essentially. And so if a staff member comes back under the way the original guidelines were written, you actually would reduce the forgiveness amount for the PPP loan. But what the SBA has come out with is part of their regulations are going to be that as long as you document that you've offered the job back to the staff member, and that staff member has documented that they've refused to come back to work, then you are not going to be subject to that same headcount requirement. But that's a recent change in the last week, right at the end of April, beginning of May when that came out.
Okay, I literally got a call yesterday on that, and I was like, well, I could bring that up tomorrow because we're gonna chat about that.
Yep.
Because I know that they're not going to be the only office that's going to have that happen, unfortunately.
Oh, exactly. But the key is to document that.
Yeah.
Document that the offer was made, and it can be in an email. The employee doesn't necessarily have to sign anything, as long as you write a memo or an email that you offered the job at the normal hours, normal wages, back to that employee, and then on such and such date, and then on X date that employee refused, and then you print that off, put that in the employee's file, and then you're going to be fine. And in your file of PPP documentation, which we definitely recommend you have for getting that forgiveness.
Hello, my name is Lisa Netzer, and I'm an employment attorney working at Minnesota Transitions. I specialize in advising employers on tough employment decisions and guiding them through the legal requirements. I also represent dentists who are facing an investigation by the Minnesota Board of Dentistry. I help dentists work through tough situations so they can get back to work.
This has been wonderful. Do you guys have any closing remarks that you'd like to add? But before we end.
Just that if you have any questions, about any of the topics that we came up today, feel free to give us a call. Our phone number is 952-297-8308, 952-297-8308. And our website is mntransitions.com.
Now,
and I'd like to really encourage people to reach out. Employment law is a bit of a minefield. If you are worried or you feel in your gut that maybe a tough decision has to be made and you'd like to just talk it through, give us a call, because these are tough decisions and they affect people's livelihoods, sometimes affects their medical insurance. There's lots of hoops to jump through. We'd be happy to work with you through it.
That's well said, Lisa. Thank you very much. You guys are awesome as always. Thank you so much. And I think our listeners are really, really going to gain, a lot of information from this, and they're going to be much better informed. So thank you very much. Thank you for listening today. I'm Christian White, the CEO of White & Associates Practice Consulting, Better Business, Better Dentistry. If you would like more information on today's topic, you can contact us at whitedentalconsulting.com/breakdown. Keep those teeth white, and see you next time on the Dental Breakdown Show.